Good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives 2. And tonight I'm joined by Mike Billington of the LaRouche organization. Mike is going to talk to us tonight about the LaRouche's newest pamphlet. It's actually not even published yet, but we're going to get a sneak preview of it and talk about the exciting possibility that the United States may actually become a real viable partner in the New Silk Road and thereby make us all rich and happy. So that's a cheerful note to start off on. Is let's think positive, make it all happen. This pamphlet that y'all have put together, I think is really a terrific effort. I had a chance to get a preview today, so congratulations on that, Mike Billington. And tell us how you've been doing, and lead us on into your topic for the night. Okay.
Well, it might be worth starting with just a review of the Malthusian horror going on in much of the world right now, in order to set the stage for not only what would be a nice recovery, a good recovery, but the absolutely essential recovery of America as a productive and industrial power. But it's worth looking around. You've seen what's on the media the last few nights, where these Haitians coming across have been rounded up and put in shackles, hands and feet, put on planes, not told where they're going. Several thousand of them, shipped, people who haven't even been in Haiti for 10 years in many cases, shipped back to a country which is in total chaos, absolutely collapsing from the combination of the earthquake in 2010 and the one earlier this year, the murder of their president, the control of the city by armed gangs, and this atrocity, which cannot help but get anybody to think about people being rounded up and shackled and put on boats back in the 18th century, is something that was so bad that the U.S. special agent, special envoy to Haiti, resigned yesterday. And what he said is, I think, worth noting. He said that his name is Daniel Foote. He says, "I will not be associated with the U.S. inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants to Haiti, a country where American officials are confined to secure compounds because of the danger posed by armed gangs and control of daily life. They are lacking food, shelter, money. The city and the country are in a state of general collapse, and yet this is our policy." In Lebanon, the Energy Department announced that they've had 7 blackouts, countrywide blackouts, because of complete lack of power, and that they expect that by the end of this month, there will be a permanent, total national blackout. No electricity for a relatively modern nation of Lebanon. In Syria, the level of poverty and disease under U.S. sanctions, a country we destroyed in 10 years of war, and now we're destroying them with sanctions. In Afghanistan, a country we spent 20 years destroying, you now have a situation where the Taliban took over without a fight, because the population was so sick of war that even the army was not willing to continue the war with the U.S. gone. And instead of joining with the neighboring countries, the Muslim countries and China and Russia and so forth, in rebuilding that country so it didn't fall back into being a terrorist and drug-infested hellhole, as it has been for 40 years under war. Instead, our Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, declared that the $9 billion of the Afghan people's money, which they forced during their occupation to be deposited in the Federal Reserve, will not be given back to the Afghan people. The result is they have no medicine, no food. They cannot pay their workers with their money. And this is basically a colonial policy being carried out by the United States. In fact, we're doing the same thing in Iraq. The oil money in Iraq does not go to the Iraqis, it goes to the Federal Reserve, and we parcel it out as we wish. This is the kind of situation which is, and this is not only in the developing sectors or in the countries where they've had war. Look at what's happening in Europe, is that the Green New Deal policies and the shutting down of coal and nuclear has led to a situation where we now have hyperinflationary increase in energy and gas prices. A place like Britain, where 80% of the homes are fueled by gas, huge portions of the population cannot afford to heat their homes any longer. And of course, similar things are happening across the United States. People are increasingly aware that we're living in a dark age, where their kids are being told that they can smoke drugs and they can decide what sex they want to be when they're 6 or 7 years old, but they're given no sense of a future, no sense of a mission in life, or any potential of being truly happy by developing their creative powers. So we're sitting in a dark age. And this is a moment, I first met Lyndon LaRouche in 1971, and I remember very clearly that he said at that time, the thing I remember most from that first presentation was he said, people aren't going to want to hear my warning that we're heading for hell. And this was right after we took the dollar off of gold in 1971. You might remember that, when Nixon pulled the plug. But he said, I'm warning that if these policies are not reversed, if we don't go back to American system policies, that we're going to have depressions, we're going to have wars, we're going to have pandemics. He warned of pandemics. And people won't want to hear it until it gets so bad that they look back and they say, my God, everybody's been lying. Who's been telling us the truth? So we better be able to tell the truth, even when it's very difficult and when you don't necessarily win accolades for it, as the LaRouche movement has for these last 50 years. So we're now at a point where internationally, the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche organization, are recognized by governments and by growing numbers of people around the world as the only platform in which the truth about the danger, and then more importantly, as LaRouche always emphasized, how we can escape this and what we must do if we're going to restore America and the world to progress and development instead of destruction, war, and decay. So it's in that light that we released this pamphlet that you mentioned this morning. Do you have a picture of that you can show? Is that?
Yes.
It's called The Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road, which is a wonderful name, because it really does give people a sense of optimism of what can be done if people have the courage to not belittle and not, yeah, there you go. And it has a picture there, it's a little hard to see, of a fusion power plant, a nuclear plant, a space program, high-speed rail, and so forth. And the idea, the introduction is called Make America Good Again. And indeed, America was good. This was a nation which the world looked to for many years, include right up and through the Second World War and Roosevelt's New Deal and so forth. And even with Kennedy, when Kennedy said, look to the stars. In fact, we have a quote from Kennedy. Can I read this quote? Sure. We begin the introduction with a quote from the inaugural address that John Kennedy gave. And I think when you hear this in light of the current effort for the effort to demonize Russia and China, to try to provoke a war with nuclear powers as the most insane character of this current very insane policy. Listen to what Kennedy said on January 20th of 61. Let both sides, the US and the Soviets at that time, seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean's depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, Let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just, and the weak secure, and the peace preserved. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. I mean, this sounds very much like LaRouche and Helga LaRouche in calling for ending this geopolitical division of the world into warring blocks, as if we were Darwinian animals who had to fight for the survival of the fittest, something that wasn't even true about animals, in fact, but is certainly not true of human beings, that there is a common aim of mankind. And the British Empire managed to crush that and keep the world in a subservient state by denying that there is a common aim to mankind, that we're basically animals, that human nature is that we're going to fight to get as much as we can and keep the other from getting whatever we can get from them. This is the idea of geopolitics, that to gain anything, you have to do it at the expense of the other. Whereas every great breakthrough in history, every Renaissance, the end of the 150 years of warfare in Europe that were resolved at the Peace of Westphalia, was based on two warring sides getting together and saying there'll be no revenge, that we have common aims as human beings, and that we shall maintain that our interests include the interests of the other. And this is what we have to deal with today. We have to recognize that while the U.S. has given up on its American system, we've basically succumbed to a British model of free market, free trade, let the banks run things. The government should not involve itself in the economy, so that the Hamiltonian idea of directing credit into those things needed for the general welfare has been lost in America, whereas that's the policy being implemented in China. So the nation that we're told is our enemy, that we have to combat and contain, is the country using the American system to direct credit into lifting 700 million people out of poverty, the first country in the history of humanity to eliminate abject poverty, and to do it through infrastructure, technology, science, education, health, precisely those infrastructure categories that Hamilton taught us we had to develop if we were going to escape from the British imperial power that we had to fight a revolution against. And today, we have to revive that American system commitment, and that's what this pamphlet is all about. We have to make America good again.
The coming U.S. economic miracle on the new Silk Road. Well, that's what I thought. I thought, wow, that's a happy ending, and I like happy endings. And I want to hear how we get from here to there. You know, we haven't gotten into the process, or even the dream, I guess, that this might actually be good for America. Is there anybody on the political scene that thinks that this is good for America, to actually unite with other countries and rebuild Afghanistan and put together this great link across Asia that will facilitate transportation and make everybody happy and wealthy? Is there any American effort toward this, or, as you say, has America given up and become just a small, just a muscle for the British Empire and given its banking power over to them?
Well, let's say that there's no one that you're going to read about in the newspapers or hear about on the media. The East Coast and the West Coast are largely dominated by these kinds of New Age lunatics. But across the heartland of America, the farmers, the industrial cities, the former industrial cities in most cases, you have people who recognize that we are facing an Armageddon of our own making, against this Green New Deal, against the Federal Reserve and Wall Street policy of transforming a nation based on investment in science, technology, engineering, and infrastructure into one in which the bottom line is the only thing that counts, and the only thing that makes money now for the financiers is speculation. So Wall Street is speculating. They have allowed themselves, maybe they brought themselves to be the implementers of the Green New Deal. Now, one might think the banks would want to see development and growth and progress. Not anymore. They want the money to go into speculative operations which can continue the bubble growing. And as a result, people like Mark Carney, who was the head of the Bank of England for many years until he took over the climate change czar at the UN, he and Michael Bloomberg, who has proud of the fact that he and his group have shut down half of America's coal plants, that they now are having the banks themselves become the implementers of the Green New Deal. Not the government, not the elected officials. The economy is now to be run lock, stock, and barrel by the banks, who are in the process of denying credit to anything that has a carbon footprint based on this fake science that carbon is changing the climate, which is simply scientifically false. But they've brainwashed the population to believing this kind of malarkey. And they're simply saying, we as responsible financiers must take climate change as the greatest existential challenge to mankind. Therefore, we as responsible bankers are going to cut credit to industries that produce carbon, to fossil fuels, to agriculture, to cows. They don't want cows anymore. Cows have flatulence, which allows methane into the air. Therefore, we're going to have to stop eating meat. And I'm not exaggerating. These are policies written out in great detail by the banking institutions themselves, by the group called the Central Bank Green Finance Alliance, and that this is what America's facing. Now, I say all that to say that this is well recognized as a disaster across the farm country, across the formerly industrialized parts of this nation. And you find a very different view, for instance, of China when you talk to the heartland farmers and industrialists and labor who recognize that, in fact, we should be working closely with China, not only because they have a tremendous amount of trade and buy our products and we buy their products, but also because we need their investment in our infrastructure. If we're going to rebuild our rail system, if we're going to start building nuclear power plants again, if we're going to build an industrial infrastructure in the ruins of what we had before, we sure as hell better be working with China, which is now the rising economy, and for whom 140 countries have joined the Belt and Road. Think of that. The majority of the world does not look to America now for leadership. They're terrified that America will begin bombing them the way we have one nation after another that was no threat to us, that they'll use their sanctions policy to impose death and starvation on entire layers of the population. But they look to China because China says, you can have your own government. We will help build your infrastructure, because we learned that infrastructure is the thing, the bottleneck that keeps impoverished countries in poverty. It's when you build infrastructure, you lift the whole platform, you lift everybody's productivity, just like Alexander Hamilton did with his internal improvements. And this is what now we have to get those Americans who are increasingly recognizing the horror of this to join openly with us and make sure that this, in fact, becomes the policy of the United States. It's not going to be easy, but it's only when the situation is as bad as this that people begin to throw away their false axioms and start thinking creatively as human beings and using those powers given by God to man and man alone to be creative, to be able to think about creating the future rather than being dragged along according to some master.
Well, you know, I love all this. And you guys have put it together in this pamphlet in a new way that it is extremely effective. And anybody that can be um, engaged in looking for solutions, can find solutions in your work. And the difficulty, of course, that I see is how do you find people that are willing to walk that walk with you? Because as you said yourself, there's nobody that was willing to be on the front page of a newspaper that would adopt your China policy. And that brings me back to the heartland. Because if I recall, when I look at the map of the elections and the red states and the blue states, well, the red states are generally called the heartland, and the deep south, and this is um, the problem, because these are the very people that are bombarded with anti-China rhetoric all the time. I just give my own example. I'm fairly active on Twitter, and I enjoy Twitter, and I see stuff from all sides. But some of the stuff that I've seen recently indicates that there's some real lockdown totalitarian like lockdown stuff, and people getting beat up, and
So you're talking about what we're doing to the Haitians today, right? That's what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about I can't take your point, but
Okay.
that idea is floating around the internet in the minds of the heartlands, red state media. That, of course, is a big problem. So how can you turn around people that are basically committed in buying a lot of media time to convince those same heartland people that China really is the enemy?
Well, no, but what I'm trying to say is that in the heartland, people don't have this crazy hatred that's stirred up by the Eastern press and the Western press, the Western part of America. I mean, you have people there who are with us. When you come to our conferences, you'll see that farmers from Nebraska, from Iowa, from South Dakota are on our program, and that they're getting tremendous support from within their states. There's an organization called the Heartland Institute, based on the former Missouri governor, I believe, which has governors from 5 or 6 different states, including Michigan, whose policy is to counter this anti-China lunacy and to join with them in bringing Chinese business here, bringing American business there, and promoting the Belt and Road idea, which is that we should be building countries, not blowing them up. And that our businesses could prosper if we still had an economy that encouraged people to make their money through production rather than speculation. But we've lost that almost entirely. And it's only in the heartland where they still believe in production, not the Wall Street speculation, that you see people who recognize that what the Schiller Institute, what the LaRouche organization are doing is the crucial platform for doing what you said, breaking through the brainwashing. And shows like yours, this is the basis, and our conferences, which bring people from all over the world together, scientists to refute the climate change lie, the fake science, economists to demand that we return to the Glass-Steagall policies that made America great during the Roosevelt and post-Roosevelt period until it was undermined and destroyed by Nixon, with the unleashing of the speculative economy in '71. This is the basis on which we can and must do it. Is it easy? No, of course it's not easy. But there's another game in town when America says the Chinese are trying to take the world away from us. Well, no, they're not trying to take the world away from us. They just don't believe there's one superpower who has the right and the capacity to say that we have to live by a rules-based order. Now, keep in mind, when you hear that they say we have to have a rules-based order and the Chinese and the Russians don't believe in a rules-based order. Well, this idea of a rules-based order is something they made up out of whole cloth. What is a rules-based order? Is that international law? Not at all. International law was codified after World War II, largely by Americans, and in the UN Charter, which said a nation cannot invade another nation that is not threatening them. Right? And what did we do? It started with Vietnam, actually. And to do that, they had to kill John Kennedy. But then they did the horror of the Vietnam War, which bankrupted America, which it destroyed our moral standing in the world, right? And which demoralized the American people, that gave rise to this crazy rock, drug, sex, countercultural fanaticism. And now that rock, drug, sex, counterculture crowd has grown up to be in the institutions. And what do we have? We have legalized drugs, legalized insanity, and we have permanent warfare, endless wars. Now, in terms of red state, blue states, it's not so much a question of the president. Presidents have a lot of power in the American system, but they're not kings. And LaRouche always focused on the idea of the institution of the presidency rather than the president per se. And the institution of the presidency includes a lot of other things, a lot of some people in Congress, the intelligence community, the military, and independent people like LaRouche, who brought the idea of the SDI to Ronald Reagan and worked with Reagan in trying to counter the Cold War conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. He said, let's get together, let's end this mutual assured destruction idea that we're going to sit there aiming our nuclear missiles at each other, and let's build a missile defense. As Reagan said when he read our speech in his announcement of the SDI, he said, let's make nuclear weapons obsolete. Right? So this is the institution of the presidency. And during the Bush and Obama years, LaRouche was still part of the institution of the presidency, largely in opposition to both of those presidents who were waging these endless wars. And then you had Trump come in, who got elected because he said he was going to end the endless wars. He was going to reindustrialize America. He was going to get out of this crazy climate change nonsense and the Paris Accord. And people said yes. The vast majority, a majority of the people said yes. And to everybody's shock and surprise, elected him. But what happened? He couldn't do it. He ordered his military to get out of Syria. They said, go to hell. Get out of Afghanistan. Go to hell. The military-industrial complex, whom Trump said, they hate me, had more power than he did. And then you have the irony of a very weak president, who's a total green fanatic, this president, who succeeded in getting out of Afghanistan and began to give the American people a sense that we should actually be out of these endless wars. And even though people complained about the chaos in the getting out, most people strongly agree with getting the hell out of 20 years of destruction. Right? So on that front, that works. But the problem is, why did they go along with getting out of Afghanistan? To end the endless wars, or to reorganize the military-industrial complex, reorganizing to confront a bigger war in Russia and in China, around Ukraine and Taiwan? These are extremely dangerous because we are in a pre-World War I type situation where we're sleepwalking into a war which could be nuclear, which could end civilization as we know it today. Why? Because Russia and China are being aggressive. Where have they invaded a country? Where have they done anything but invest in the real economy? That's not why. The why is because the financial institutions, what we call the British Empire, because it's largely centered in the city of London and Wall Street, right? This empire is bankrupt. absolutely, utterly bankrupt. They've printed trillions of dollars to prop up the banking institution. That money didn't go into the real economy, as everybody knows. It was propping up the banks and to finance wars. So now that is so enormous that it's all leaking into the speculation in the commodities and oil and gas, and it's beginning a hyperinflationary bust that could blow this whole thing sky high. And they need to have the third world enslaved to backwardness, to have their raw materials cheap and cheap labor. They need a war to justify continuing the spending in the military industrial complex. And therefore, they hate China and Russia because they are giving the world an alternative of development rather than Cold War, zero-sum geopolitics.
Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. And I have to say, here on our Friday night sessions, we have pretty much made that case. And I have to get back to my own question, though. You say there's a miracle coming with the new Silk Road. And so far, all I can see is a U.S. train wreck coming. So how do you turn the train around in the next 29 minutes?
Well, I find just reading the table of contents of this pamphlet gives people the kind of optimism they need to not be fearful, terrified, demoralized by the mess that we're in today, but actually to think, my God, we are human beings. We have a way to do it. I'll just run through it. When I first read this, I thought, boy, mostly it was Jason Ross and Megan DeBroat now. I think you know them too, who put this together, a few other people, with help from Paul Gallagher and Marcia Baker and Richard Freeman, people you know from the EIR staff. But here it is. It starts with Make America Good Again. Then it has a section on the history that was stolen from you, which is sort of like what I just went through about how America was turned away from the American system and adopted this British system. Then there's a section about Lyndon LaRouche. And it makes the point that, when they put LaRouche in prison and myself with him, it wasn't we who suffered. It was the American people who were denied access to his ideas. And those ideas were kept out of the media, kept out of the universities. And so that is an essential part of what we can and must do right now, here and around the world. Then build a global anti-Malthusian alliance to end the British monarchy's Green New Deal. That's what I've been discussing here. We can and we must end this Green New Deal genocide, whose purpose is to depopulate portions of the world, something the British have always wanted to do, but they're doing it through this method at this point rather than through their eugenics movement of an earlier age. Then conquering inflation and depression with Glass-Steagall and development. I think I don't have to go through what Glass-Steagall is, I think, right? You've discussed that on your show many times. It was in 2001, in 1971, 50 years ago, when Richard Nixon pulled the plug on the dollar, pulled the plug on the Bretton Woods system, and basically ended Glass-Steagall. Over time, they ended Glass-Steagall, which allowed the financial system to become one of speculating on currencies, on everything else, rather than very strict rules that made the banking system direct its credit into the things needed for the general population. That's the way Glass-Steagall worked. Then a mission for the world, create productive jobs and productivity. We have a plan for 1.5 billion jobs for the world. A mission for the world, double world food production. Establish independent family farming. What we have now is a situation where we could virtually overnight double food production on a world scale, which would then barely meet the actual nutritional needs of the human race today, let alone where it will be 10 to 20 years from now. Then we ask certain questions and answer. These are sort of like theoretical issues. What is an infrastructure platform? It's what I described before. When you build infrastructure, you create a platform that lifts every single person to a higher level of productivity, a greater access to machines, to transportation, connectivity, power, greater amount of electricity, and so forth. These are the things that lift the platform of the entire nation. What is a development corridor? By and large, the Belt and Road is explicitly Lyndon LaRouche's idea of a development corridor. When the Chinese first launched, when Xi Jinping first announced the Belt and Road, the One Belt, One Road, he called it, or the Eurasian Land Bridge, they actually didn't have this idea. And Helga made several trips to China, spoke to all the major institutions and government forces. I was on one of those trips with her. And we learned quickly that they had a very vague idea of what the Belt and Road was going to be. And we conveyed to them this idea that this was not just expending some of their technology into another country. It was changing the world away from a neo-colonial or colonial division into the rich and the poor, the free world versus the authoritarian world, and all the nonsense they talk about, and creating a corridor, a series of corridors, where you open up territory that was now basically useless, and yet there's great raw materials. You can build new cities. You can build 1,000 new cities and create an environment in which we can rapidly expand the world's population with productive centers, scientific and technological capacity, nuclear power, fusion power type of cities, what we call nuplexes. Then nuclear NWAPA. This is very important. John Kennedy launched an idea called NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. Now look what's going on in the West today. Massive droughts, fires destroying entire cities, right? And everybody says, oh, this is terrible. It's climate change. Well, this is nonsense. It's not climate change, right? It's that we have refused to develop the water resources that we knew we were going to need. Right? Kennedy wanted NWAPA. What's the idea? You take the water that spills off into the Arctic up in Canada and in Alaska. You bring that down. There's an easy way to do it with some pumping, but a lot of it can just flow down the trench, the Rocky Mountain Trench. You can green the desert. You can take the water all the way down to northern Mexico and green the desert there. This was all on the table, worked out, designed. And we picked up on it and fought for it. Right? And it was denied, rejected, right? Why? No reason. It's just that nobody wanted to invest in long-term solutions. And we warned that if you don't do this, that the aquifers are going to dry up. You're going to have a lack of water. Now, not only the NWAPA project, but we have a map showing where you can build nuclear power plants along the oceans and desalinate water. And that could have been done. Instead, we shut down our nuclear power program, and we've barely built any in the last 50 years. So these are all solutions LaRouche had at the time that were rejected, right? And this is why the nation has been denied access to these ideas. Then measuring power sources. How do you measure power? Are windmills and solar panels actually a great boon because they're free, because the sun is shining and the wind is blowing? Nonsense. You measure energy by energy flux density, how you create more and more dense capacity of energy, which has therefore greater power, as for instance with nuclear power, which can be used to desalinate water, salt water. These are the ideas that need to be brought back to the American people, that they have been denied these ideas. And of course, nuclear fusion. We've talked about fusion many times. Kennedy's original plan was to have fusion online by the turn of the century, 21 years ago. And now we're still talking about 30 years from now, although it could be done much faster. And we've written some very interesting articles on some of the ideas that are now being developed. And then space, right? Of course, man is not earthbound, right? Man has an imperative to reach out. Within a few billion years, this earth is going to burn up when the sun burns up. Just a few billion. just a few billion. But we better get to work now, right? Developing the resources on the moon, getting to Mars, setting up colonies on Mars, and moving out into other galaxies. Not only other solar systems, but other galaxies. These are all very real issues. And it's in that sense that when you reach out to the American people and you provide them with this sense of optimism of what America was and what America has to be, that you have the potential of taking this great, great crisis as a moment of tremendous opportunity.
Oh man, maybe if I was 20 or something, I can't, I just can't see the optimism right now. I guess I've just been sitting here, with the past 2 years of lockdown and seeing our economy getting shut down and people becoming dependent upon government handouts or rent subsidies or rent abatements that are going to come due. All of these financial bailouts to corporations that, I mean, I am seeing an extremely powerful inertia in the present system that is going to have to be shaken by something that's it's going to have to be noticeable. And for us to just say, hey, we should go back to the moon, we should recognize that we could green the desert. If we did the NWAPA, we could have all the food we need. We could double the population. We have a problem in the entire policy, as you identified it after World War II, of our State Department, and what is now the embodiment of Henry Kissinger's NSSM 200, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the one in which he says, we're going to have to use food as a weapon, because we can't let these third world countries develop. To me,
and use up our resources in their country. That's the way.
Yeah, that's right. The whole theory of all this, the Rockefeller theory, is that they don't know how to use all those resources that are under their ground. They're just sitting on it, growing their little plots of corn, while underneath of it there's billions of dollars worth of oil, and they don't know it. So we should just go and get it because we know what to do with it, because we are the smart people. Well, that kind of a ruse, has been played out too many times. And they are afraid that the people of Africa might realize that they can actually not only be self-sufficient, but probably more efficient and make better machines and do better economic building, if only merely left alone. And that has been the story of the last 80 years, that the so-called foundations have, and with, of course, the monetary hooks that get in with the economic hitman type of idea. All of this has brought us to this day where it doesn't look to me like they're going to give up power. This is still the policy that
these countries would not have developed if we had left them alone. They probably would be better off than they were, being subjected to colonial looting and so forth. But the problem to the oligarchs is that China has moved in with collaboration from Russia, and they are offering something else to these countries. And these countries are saying, absolutely, finally, we have some hope of escaping abject poverty, because there's somebody in the world who's willing to do what Roosevelt intended to do after the war. As he told Churchill, we're not fighting this war to save your damn empire. And after the war, we are not allowing you back into your colonies, but rather we're going to take American system methods that we used to build up our nation, a lot of it during a total depression. How did Roosevelt do that? Massive infrastructure, water projects, sewer projects, transportation projects, nuclear power was being developed at the time. We did it during a depression, and he was going to do that in the rest of the world. And sadly, he died, and a very, very little man from Wall Street was put in power who turned the colonies back to the British and the French and the Dutch. And we had 30 years of hideous colonial war that we didn't need to have had. Have you ever read Percy Shelley, John? Did you ever read Shelley's poetry?
Not since college. It's been a long time.
Pick it up. He wrote a thing called A Defense of Poetry, which discusses precisely the situation we're in right now. Precisely. That in a moment in which the order that is begins to unravel and collapse because of oligarchies, because of people who think like Aristotle and the British, that some people are born to rule and some people are born to be slaves, rather than that all men are created equal in the image of God. But because of those oligarchical societies, things break down. And it's at that point, Shelley argues in his A Defense of Poetry, that the poet becomes the legislator of history, that the poet inspires the people who under normal conditions don't think about profound ideas. But he says at a moment of crisis, that's when people suddenly become capable of comprehending profound notions of man and science and the universe. And it's precisely this moment that we are in. And again, we are not alone in the world. We are not sitting under this collapsed hulk of the European and American financial oligarchy. We're not alone in the world. There's another reality out there, which most of the world has already turned to. And unfortunately, the financial oligarchs who want to sit on top of their $2.5 quadrillion of useless money that doesn't represent wealth, it represents speculation, which is looting the real economy. They want to keep that bubble going, right? And to do so, some of them are even willing to start a war against Russia and China, thinking maybe that they'll back down because we're so powerful. But that's not the case. Therefore, how do we take this moment where people are increasingly aware and give them access to these profound ideas? That's what our conferences are. These conferences over the last year and a half have moved thousands of people to begin thinking like human beings and being tremendously inspired because they are able to see great scientific minds refuting the popular opinion about so-called pseudoscience like the carbon stuff. They see great economists talking about the history of how economic policies transformed through a renaissance, creating an entire new era of mankind. How great artists and musicians, going back to classical culture, were able to inspire huge numbers of people to think about classical beauty the same way you think about classical science, because it's the same process in the human mind that makes great discoveries in science as makes great discoveries in musical composition. The famous example of Einstein, who when he was stuck on a problem would pick up his violin and play Bach, and he'd come up with a solution. That's not accidental. This is the nature of classical music, not music that is meant to appeal below the belt, but music that appeals above the belt, to the mind, to the higher emotions that bring real happiness, the kind of happiness referred to in our Declaration of Independence that came from Gottfried Leibniz. These are the ideas that now, after 50 years of LaRouche's work, now is the moment when these ideas can and must, it's freedom and necessity, be implemented in order to prevent a human disaster and to bring about a real renaissance. And the Renaissance this time is going to have to be global. You're not going to have a European Renaissance or a Chinese Renaissance or an Arab Renaissance. It has to be now, given the age that we're in, of transportation, communication, and so on, we can bring about, and we must bring about, an actual global renaissance based on the profound ideas, the higher ideas of man, the future of science, the idea that it's the human mind alone capable of seeing 50 years in the future and determining today's actions based on this knowledge of where we can and we must go 50 years, 100 years, even 1,000 years forward, or as I said, 2 billion years forward. This is the uniqueness of man, that we have to give people a sense that life is not about sense certainty and sensual gratification. It's about, what do you do with your life that actually leads to creating a better future for mankind as a whole? That's what it means to be human. And now is the moment where we have the best potential and opportunity for getting people to act on that basis. And increasingly, tens of thousands, even millions of people are doing so. Unfortunately, not enough of them are here in the United States. That's what we're doing with the pamphlet, with your program, with our conferences, is to make sure we succeed in that, which is our local task.
Well, again, when I saw the pamphlet, I was very excited because I thought, wow, this puts it together pretty darn well. You know, I've spent at least 20 of my shows reading excerpts from Graham Lowry's "How the Nation Was Won," and I know that you knew the author Graham Lowry, and this tells in your pamphlet, gives a summary of this history, the real history of the tradition of freedom in the United States, in the colonies, coming from the Puritans, and tracing that through the whole 18th century up until 1754 or so, which I haven't got to yet because I still got a couple of more chapters to read. And that type of effort, I think, is what you're talking about. And I want you to know that it's on a playlist on my YouTubes. If you or anyone at the organization at LaRouche wants to hijack those or refer to them, you're very welcome to it. It's readings with comments by myself, so I'm not just like stealing the book for, I don't make any money off it. I just want you to make it available, because people need to know the real history, and not this fake history that we've been taught in our high school history books for far too long. There's so many wonderful gems in the work of the Schiller and LaRouche organizations, that I'm really happy to be associated with you guys. I'd also say that the goal you set there is simply that we return to our basic humanity as human beings, and to acknowledge the wonder of creation and the miracle of life, and to preserve it, and not to feel threatened by other people, just because just because the media keeps us concerned, or there's always something to worry about. If you keep your television on, they will provide you something. But this whole effort that they've been making, for my whole lifetime, since World War II, to keep us in a state of nervousness, anxiety, fear, not knowing what's going on, and then inducing, through such things as popular music, a willingness to let go, to recede into the kind of fuzzy acknowledgement of reality that doesn't really demand close study or close observation. You're on a track. You're working in a career, and you have kids, and you're going through this thing, and you're fed television programs like I Love Lucy and things that are just going to kind of amuse you, but not really teach you anything, and at the same time, kind of make you feel like that life is full of problems and issues, and it's never really any good answers to anything. That whole thing, that whole idea that we've lived through has been the seduction of the American mind away from the actual essential humanity that our ancestors came here to preserve. And now if we can just recognize the fact that 100 years ago, people understood life better than we do right now because we've been subjected to propaganda for our whole lives, propaganda that teaches us not to worry about what humanity is going to be facing in 100 years, not to worry about the future, not to think of, well, if I don't, uh, it, if I want to have fun tonight and stay out and get drunk, well, that means I might not get an A on that test, but who cares? I'll have a good time.
My friend's joke about China, right?
No,
He was talking to a guy and he said, "How can you support China? They're a vicious dictatorship. There's no freedom over there."
yeah,
And my friend said, "You're right. Would you believe it that in China the kids have to do their homework?
yeah.
Isn't that disgusting? We need to bring some freedom over there. They're not even allowed to smoke marijuana or watch pornography over there. There's no freedom."
Well,
So
I guess that's a kind of a joke, but it's not funny because it's
no,
real. It's real here, and it's a sad thing. It's all part of what I'm talking about. Is that this is not it's part of our education system. It's just everywhere. God, so we've got a lot of work to do, I guess, is all I can say as the last word tonight. And you guys are working very, very hard. No, what I wanted to say is we are induced into a state of moral relativism.
yeah,
In which, well, we could say, oh, I'm worried about the kids from Haiti that are getting deported. But on the other hand, what can I do about it? And there's other problems I could be thinking about. And so we get into this like, oh, I can't do anything about it. And isn't that awful? And you just live your life thinking about, oh, how terrible those other situations are that other people are facing, and detach yourself from it, because we have been induced into this mental state in which we think that we're not really part of life, that we're just kind of going through our own little scenario and narrative. And but the answer is no. We are all connected. The whole world is connected. All humanity is connected, and it's obvious that if we were all awake and aware of what's going on, instead of being uh, uh, you know brainwashed, if we were all aware and awake that these possibilities that you mentioned are real, and only thing that's standing between us and them are a few very egotistical trillionaires or billionaires that don't want to let go of their dream of cashing in on the worthless paper that you referred to. That's all there is to it. We just got to get the word out there. Um,
well, let me encourage all of your listeners to get in touch with the LaRouche organization. We will have this pamphlet will be printed hopefully by the earlier mid next week. We want to get them out in tens of thousands of copies. This is what you said. This is a way to give people a sense that there's a real world out there, that it's not just satisfying your immediate sensual gratification, which is what the media and everybody wants you to do, but that you can actually find real joy by developing your creative powers and participating in building a new paradigm for mankind. And I invite you all to join in this. It's a very joyous undertaking, I can assure you.
All right, Mike Billington, thank you very, very much. And everybody, thanks for being with us tonight in the chat. Marshall Maluk, I see you in the chat there. God bless you. Thank you so much for your hard work, for spreading the word and helping us get our schedules together. Mike, have a great evening. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Am I